WWE SummerSlam 2013 will go down as one of the best WWE pay-per-views of that year. With 17,739 fans in attendance, the crowd was in for a treat. With matches like Bray Wyatt versus Kane in a Ring of Fire match, Dolph Ziggler and Kaitlyn taking on Biggie Langston and AJ Lee, and the highly anticipated bout built as the Best versus the Beast with CM Punk versus Brock Lesnar, this show did not disappoint. But in the main event, we saw two warriors, two men, battle it out for the WWE Championship between Daniel Bryan and John Cena. Today, we have a look back at this short but underrated feud between the both men. On the July 15, 2013 episode of Monday Night Raw, coming off the heels of retaining his WWE Championship against the world's strongest man in Mark Henry at the Money in the Bank pay-per-view from the previous night, the question was brought front to the table on who would be John Cena's next opponent. Raw GM at the time, Brad Maddox, came out to declare to Cena that he would be allowed to choose his own opponent for the big show. Later on in the night, with a handful of WWE superstars on the stage, John Cena came out to make his decision, but with the WWE Universe helping him out. After naming a select few like Ryback, Randy Orton, RVD, Fandango, and etc., John Cena finally selected Daniel Bryan as his opponent. The Barclays Center erupted with yes chants as Daniel Bryan came out and went face to face with the champ as the show went off the air. The next week, a contract signing took place to make the SummerSlam main event match official. Brad Maddox, who moderated the signing, ripped into Daniel Bryan, questioned Cena why choose Daniel Bryan when he could have chose any other WWE superstar. Bryan then proceeds to come out and tell Maddox that it seems that he doesn't want Bryan in the title match at all. Maddox then asks Bryan why does he think Cena chose him before he is interrupted by the champ himself. Cena then goes on to praise Bryan, stating that he chose him because Brad Maddox and the dumbasses that he works for a lot of times are afraid to see God-given talent ability. And after both men signed the contract, the match is officially made official, and after back and forth between the Raw GM and Bryan, it is announced that Bryan will have a series of matches later on in the show. In that main event, Bryan had a gauntlet match where he defeated Jack Swagger, Antonio Cesaro, and Ryback by DQ. Cena then came out to help Bryan with Ryback, with the show ending with Maddox and McMahon announcing Bryan's opponent for next week, his former Team Hell No partner, the Big Red Monster, Kane. To kick off the next week's episode of Monday Night Raw, we see an in-ring segment between Mr. McMahon and Daniel Bryan. McMahon tells Bryan that Cena has been lying to him, calling Cena a massive manipulator. McMahon goes on to say that he doesn't want Cena nor Bryan to walk out of SummerSlam as the WWE Champion, stating that he will be the one who will win in the end. Bryan goes on to proclaim that the fans want to see a new WWE Champion, with the crowd getting loud behind Bryan. Backstage, Bryan confronts and asks Cena what if what Vince was saying is true. Cena responds by telling Bryan, "I wouldn't believe a word he said." Bryan claps back by saying that Vince McMahon, good or bad, has always been honest with me. Cena ends the segment by asking Daniel, "You're calling me a liar?" Later in the night, Bryan defeats Kane, and in the main event, Cena defeats Ryback in a tables match. Raw goes off the air with Bryan handing the title over to Cena, claiming that it will be his come SummerSlam. On the August 5th episode of Monday Night Raw, the boss's daughter, Stephanie McMahon, comes out to kick off Raw, stating that her father does not think Bryan is championship material. We then look at the Titantron and the video as Bryan is going through a complete corporate makeover, with Bryan wearing a suit, lifting weights, and eating a steak, even though Bryan is an actual vegan in real life. Bryan thanks Stephanie for the makeover, but thinks the company really wants someone who is jacked, wearing cargo shorts, and a bright yellow t-shirt, thus referencing the 11-time WWE champ. Mr. McMahon then comes out giving a few points to Bryan's new look. Vince then states that there is one more problem though, and that's Bryan's beard. Wade Barrett then comes out to shave Bryan's beard off. After Bryan retaliates and shaving a piece of Barrett's beard off, he then takes his suit off to reveal his own t-shirt, similar to Cena's with the "Beard is Here" t-shirt. Later in the night, Cena comes out to talk to the WWE Universe and responds to Bryan's comments early in the night. Cena states that he isn't going to change for anyone. He then tells Bryan to stop dwelling in the past because it's like comparing the WWE to the Arena Football League. Cena ends the promo saying, "Our time is now, and the champ is here." We then see Mr. Money in the Bank, Randy Orton, make his way down to the ring, saying that no matter who wins at SummerSlam, he still has the Money in the Bank contract. The Shield comes down to ringside, ready to gang up on both Cena and Orton. But then we see Daniel Bryan running out to the ring as Brad Maddox announces a 6-man tag team match for the main event. In that match, Bryan puts the Yes Lock in onto Rollins as Ambrose and Reigns attack Bryan to win the match by DQ. After fighting the Shield off, Randy Orton hits the RKO on both Bryan and Cena. Randy then gets his Money in the Bank contract to cash in, only to leave as the Shield triple powerbomb Bryan to end the night. On the August 12, 2013 episode of Monday Night Raw, which was the go-home show before SummerSlam, we kicked off the night with Bryan taking on Wade Barrett, with Brad Maddox serving as the special guest referee. Wade Barrett wins the match after a fast count from Maddox. Mr. McMahon then calls out Maddox later on in the night to explain his actions. Maddox explains that he hasn't reffed in a while, so he may have gotten a little bit too excited. He then asks McMahon to give him a second chance and let him referee the SummerSlam main event. Triple H comes out to the ring and believes that he himself should be the referee, not Maddox. He then proceeds to pedigree Maddox, and it is officially announced that Triple H is the official guest referee for the SummerSlam main event match. On the new edition of Miz TV, we see the final confrontation between Cena and Bryan before SummerSlam. Bryan tells Cena that he wears his shirt as a parody because he thinks that Cena is a parody of wrestling. Bryan proclaims that he wants to be WWE champion for one reason and one reason only. And it's not for the fame, it's not for the glory, it's so that everybody knows and it proves that when I step foot in this ring, there is nobody better than Daniel Bryan. Cena then responds to Bryan by stating that he is not a parody. The reason why Bryan is out here is the same reason he is out here, for the fans. Cena then goes on to talk about his dedication, his passion for the WWE Universe and the WWE itself. He then goes on to talk about how he is proud of his accomplishments, and so should Bryan. Cena then tells Bryan to please call him a parody. Please think of him as a joke, because that is what all his peers have said about him. That list includes Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Batista, Randy Orton, CM Punk, The Rock. Bryan then interrupts Cena by telling him, "You talk about all those people that they are just so much better than me," with the fan in the crowd stating, "They are." Cena chuckles and says to Bryan that you gotta understand, you're hopefully on your way to greatness, but I can't put you in that class because you don't belong in that class. Cena tells Bryan that if you're good enough to earn this Sunday, then and only then will you earn my respect. Bryan asks Cena, how can you understand the hunger, understand the desire that I have for holding the WWE title just once, how can you understand that? And you can't. Bryan goes on to say that there is a custom that he learned while he was in Japan, and that's to fire someone up. That's to let a fire under them. That's to motivate them. They take their hand and they slap you across the face. As Bryan wishes so bad that he can do it to Cena right then and there, he can't, because Cena is not a wrestler and he doesn't deserve it. Cena then proceeds to slap Bryan, and then what looks like a fight is about to happen between the two men. Triple H comes down to the ring and calms Cena down. We then see Randy Orton come out and holds the Money in the Bank contract on the stage as Michael Cole says, Will Sunday be John Cena's night? Will it be Daniel Bryan's night? Or will it be Randy Orton's night? This was an underrated segment that should get talked a lot more. This wasn't your typical heel versus face confrontation, but two men who love what they do and will do anything if it ends with them being called champion. With 17,739 fans packed in the Staples Center in Los Angeles, California, it was time for the WWE Championship main event match between John Cena and Daniel Bryan. The match starts off with both men locking up, getting some holds in as well. They even redid the exact same spot 10 years prior when they had a match against one another on Velocity. As Bryan was trying to go in on the yes lock earlier, Cena gets out of the ring as Cena goes to the ringside doctor and whispers in his ear. It should be noted here that Cena did work this match injured, but as we saw throughout the match, it did not stop Cena and Bryan from putting on an absolute masterpiece. Both warriors would hit any moves they would have in their arsenals to bring the other opponent down. When we see Cena hit an AA onto Daniel Bryan, 1, 2, Bryan kicks out. As Cena tries to hit a second AA on the top rope, Bryan counters and tries to hit Cena with the Hurricanrana, only for Cena to counter and place it in on an STF, only for Bryan to reverse that STF and place in the yes lock. Bryan then goes to hit 2 missile drop kicks, only for the third one to be countered into a wicked clothesline from Cena. After trading shots and colliding into one another, Cena slaps Bryan, telling him to come on. Bryan slaps Cena, and then we begin to see both men slap the absolute shit out of one another as Bryan begins to unload on Cena. Bryan gets caught in midair with Cena, stating that it's over. Bryan counters, hooks the leg, 1, 2, Cena kicks out, only be kicked into the side of the head by Bryan. As Bryan slowly gets up from the corner with 17,739 fans in the Staples Center chanting yes, 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 Bryan hits Cena, who sold the move perfectly with the running move, by the way. 1, 2, 3. The winner of this match and new WWE Champion, Daniel Bryan. As Bryan is celebrating, Cena turns Bryan around as we see both men shaking hands out of respect for one another. After Jerry Lawler says that this could be the year of the beard, I hear voices in my head as Randy Orton marches down to the ring with his Money in the Bank contract. Randy Orton then leaves and walks back up the ramp, only to stop when Bryan continues the yes chants. Daniel Bryan is then hit with the pedigree from Triple H. Randy Orton comes back in the ring, and SummerSlam ends with Orton winning the WWE title with Triple H by his side, thus forming the Authority, and the rest is history. John Cena versus Daniel Bryan at SummerSlam will go down as one of the best SummerSlam main event matches of all time. This feud wasn't like your typical annual rivalry, but one man showing the world that he is a wrestler, and the other showing the world that people like him can be called champion as well. Hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks again.